Coming up on The World Today. Italy's most wanted mafia boss, Matteo Messina Denaro, arrested in Sicily. China says it will continue to share COVID data amid calls for more transparency. And tight security in Davos ahead of World Economic Forum opening. And Italy's most wanted mafia boss, Matteo Messina Denaro, has been arrested in Sicily after 30 years on the run. Messina Denaro was reportedly detained in a private clinic in Sicily's capital, Palermo, where he was receiving treatment for cancer. He's alleged to be a boss of the notorious Cosa Nostra Mafia, and he was tried and sentenced to life in jail in absentia in 2002 over numerous murders. More than 100 members of the armed forces were involved in his arrest. Italian media reports that Messina Denaro was captured and taken to a secret location by the Carabinieri. He was reportedly visiting the clinic under a fake name for a course of chemotherapy. A video circulated by Italian media appears to show people standing in the street applauding the Italian police as Messina Denaro is led away. Among the murders he was convicted over are the 1992 killing of anti-mafia prosecutors Giovanni Falcone, Paolo Borsellino, the deadly 1993 bomb attacks in Milan, Florence and Rome, and the kidnapping, torture and killing of the 11-year-old son of a mafioso turned state witness. And following the World Health Organization Director General, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, discussion with the Director of China's National Health Commission about the COVID-19 situation in the country, the WHO appreciates the meeting as well as the public release of information on the overall situation. Chinese officials provided information to WHO and in a press conference on a range of topics, including outpatient clinics, hospitalizations, patients requiring emergency treatment and critical care, and others. Here's an update of the situation. Passengers laden with luggage flocked to the main rail station in China's capital city of Beijing on Monday, heading to their hometowns for Lunar New Year holidays that health experts fear can intensify a raging COVID-19 outbreak in areas less equipped to handle it. After 3 years of strict antivirus controls, China abruptly abandoned its zero-COVID policy in early December, letting the virus run freely through its 1.4 billion population.
I am so happy. Because of the pandemic, we were under lockdown for 3 years, which was particularly long. Finally, lockdowns were lifted. It's much easier to go home now. The first thing is convenience, and the second is that there are no more lockdowns or quarantines.
I am not worried about the virus because our immunity is okay because we're young. The first time I tested positive was because I was a volunteer and there were too many infected people there. The second time, there was no way I could have avoided it. I haven't tested positive since the reopening. Now a lot of people are testing positive and still some are not testing positive. I'm not worried about the virus. Back in my hometown, there are many people who have tested positive, but I'm not worried about it.
Authorities had said January 14 that nearly 60,000 people with COVID had died in hospitals between December 8 and January 12, a huge increase from previous figures that had been criticized by the World Health Organization for not reflecting the scale and severity of the outbreak. However, China today reaffirmed its pledge to share COVID information with the WHO and the international community after releasing new data showing a big jump in COVID-19 related deaths over the weekend.
On January 14, Director of the NHC, Ma Xiaowei, had a phone call with the WHO Director General, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, to exchange views on pandemic response. The WHO spoke highly of China for the public release of epidemic information at the press conferences of the Joint Prevention and Control Mechanism of the State Council It is also noticed that the Chinese government is stepping up efforts to expand clinical treatment and intensive care service for all groups of people. The two sides have agreed to continue to strengthen technical exchanges and cooperation on epidemic prevention and control, and jointly maintain global health security.
In the meantime, China has distributed more than 600,000 pulse oximeters to rural hospitals and village clinics ahead of the Lunar New Year holidays in its COVID-19 response efforts. Oximeters are fingertip devices commonly used during the pandemic to quickly check a person's blood oxygen levels. State media reports that each rural village health clinic has received 2 free pulse oximeters, and each township health center has received 1 free oxygen machine. China's National Health Commission has said it would equip every village clinic with fever drugs and oxygen supplies. Several experts forecast that more than 1 million people in China will die from the disease this year, and there are fears a major COVID-19 outbreak could hit rural areas where health systems are weak. Welcome back, and we are following the COVID-19 situation in China and how that affects the rest of the world. Joining me to talk about this, Dr. Peter Mosc. He's a research fellow, School of Medicine, University of Aberdeen. He joins me now. Thank you for joining me on the program. What's your take of the epidemiological situation and the impact of this wave in China?
Thank you for having me. When it comes to the epidemiologic situation of the SARS-CoV-2 in China and the current wave, there are several factors that may be tied to this, basically. If you recall, you will know that here in the UK, back in 2020 and 2021, we had a gradual phase of easing of lockdown and restrictions. And also, we also followed up with continuous vaccination, first, second, and the booster dose as well. So what that implies is the gradual reopening across many countries in the world allowed people to get exposed to the virus itself, despite they had the vaccine-induced immunity. So by so doing, it means that you do have a robust immunity, both from the vaccine and from the natural exposure to the virus. So when it comes to China, for instance, you also know that it was just about a few weeks ago, they kind of abolished the COVID-0 policy. So it means that basically maybe majority of the populations of Chinese do not have a significant exposure to the virus itself. That is on one angle. And also one could also point to the fact that maybe the rate of vaccination in the country is not as high as initially released to the general world. So basically, from reports, we know that people who have received the 3rd dose are barely less than 50% of the population. So that actually will have a significant impact when it comes to the virus spread in China.
When you hear about, there have been many grim predictions, including the report over the weekend where we're told almost 64% of Chinese population actually have COVID-19. Have you seen that report, and what do you make of it?
I would say this actually speaks to the basic immunology 101. So when you are exposed to a pathogen, basically, it allows you to create an immune response. And that immune response is called the innate immunity. So basically, this is your first time you're exposing yourself to this particular virus or pathogen. So it gives you a fair understanding on how to respond in subsequent exposure. Like I said initially, China, we're not really having that leg of the pandemic. Also, when it comes to the vaccines that are deployed around the world, apart from the ones used in China, which is the Sinovac and Sinopharm, for instance, let's say Pfizer or Moderna or AstraZeneca, they are actually targeting the spike protein. So the spike protein of the virus is that particular region the virus uses to gain access into the cell host, in this regard, the human host. Whereas in China, they are actually using the inactivated SARS-CoV-2 platform. So they have the entire virus itself being inactivated to develop their own vaccines. So basically, one could argue that the well-specified design of the mRNA type of vaccine allows for effective blockage of the virus to gain access into the host, compared to the other platform that is being used in China that is just a basic inactivation of the entire virus. So now when you do the comparison, basically, you can easily tell that for us that are using, let's say, the mRNA type of vaccine, we do have a more comparative advantage, first by having a well-developed virus that is able to block the entryway of that particular virus into the host. And if the virus gain access into the host, for instance, by escaping immunity, the vaccines we have in this part of the world have the capability to neutralize the virus itself. So you have two components in that vaccine. And the other component I mentioned initially is the component where we do have a significant level of persons in the UK, in the US, across Africa, who are exposed to the virus itself. So these two combinations, like you know already, is called the hybrid kind of immunity. And that is where robust. And to also make the last point is, when it comes to many countries around the world, many are actually on their booster dose, which is the fourth or the third dose, actually. And that is actually giving these countries an edge compared to what you're having in China. So these numbers we are seeing may likely go up in the nearest days to come, because now we have the Chinese New Year that is, I think, is on Sunday, and you're going to have people socializing, going about their normal businesses. And the current dominant variant we have right now is the XBB.1.5 and the XB 1.1. And these two variants are dominant variant, and the rate of effectivity is one person do have the capability to infect 16 persons. So you can see that the R0 number is really high. So the rate of transmissibility is going to go off the roof in China based on the current dominant variants we are seeing, which are circulating simultaneously. So if you do the comparison, the addition of these two variants, we know that the XB 1.1 is at a rate of 34% when it comes to the rate of transmission. Then the X 1.15 is at a rate of 28%. So when you do the addition of these two percentage, you stand at 62% basically. So you can see that you have a two-arrow-edged sword going through the population in China with less immunity among the population. And even though they've done their vaccine, let's say in 2021, the immunity level right now, I'm sure, is below 50%. And that also would cause chaos they are saying.
Dr. Moesi, is there justification for countries that are putting in extra measures at their ports because of, the transmissible subvariant?
Yes, because that is necessary to ensure that the importation of new variants is not really going around the world. That is one. But also, one could also argue that because many countries around the world do have the level of booster dose already being rolled out, and there is a significant level of exposure to the natural virus itself, the rate at which the pandemic was in early 2020 is not going to be the same where we are right now, because we do have a reasonable level of immunity compared to where we are coming from. But if countries decide to put measures in place, well, that is relative, but people will have to do what they have to do to ensure that their own people are kept safe at all times.
Indeed. We appreciate your time. Thank you. Dr. Peter Mosc is a research fellow at the School of Medicine, University of Aberdeen. Thank you for your expertise on the issue.
Thank you for having me.
Well, to other stories now. This weekend was one to reflect on the person and work of a late pastor and civil rights activist, Martin Luther King Jr. On Sunday morning, US President Joe Biden was at King's local church, Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, where he delivered a sermon at the invitation of the pastor, Democratic US Senator Raphael Warnock, centered on a common theme: the country and the world battling against autocratic forces. King would have been 94 years old on Sunday. He was assassinated in 1968 at the age of 39 in Memphis, Tennessee, by avowed segregationist James Earl Ray. King was pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church from 1960 until his death.
There's much at stake. Much at stake. And you know, the fact is that this is the time of choosing. This is the time of choosing. Direct choice.
We'll come back to talking some more about that. But staying in the United States, the mayor of New York traveled to the Mexican border city of El Paso on Sunday and declared that there is no room in New York for busloads of migrants being sent to America's most populous city. Eric Adams, a Democrat, was also critical of the administration of the Democrat U.S. President Joe Biden, saying that now is the time for the national government to do its job regarding the migrant crisis at America's southern border. The visit of a New York mayor to a southern border city about the issue of immigrants is unprecedented. Busloads of migrants have been shipped north to New York and other cities by Republican-run states. That has exacerbated a housing crisis in New York and a worsening homeless crisis in the city. Well, I understand joining us right now on the issue of the weekend, which was one to reflect the person and work of late pastor and civil rights activist Martin Luther King Jr. Joining us to talk about this is VOA's Ignatius Arnold, who's currently at the Martin Luther King Memorial in Washington, D.C. We understand Americans are enjoying a holiday today in memory of him. Thanks for joining us, Ignatius.
Millicent, thank you for having me. How are you?
Fine, thank you. President Joe Biden made history yesterday, becoming the first U.S. president to give the sermon at Ebenezer Baptist. While the president is Catholic, how significant is that, you know, he decided to be personally involved in remembering the late civil rights activist?
Well, Senator Raphael Warnock is a Democratic senator in Atlanta. He is currently also the pastor for the Ebenezer Baptist Church, the church where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. used to be the lead pastor before he was assassinated in 1963. And so he actually gave out the invitation to President Biden to be there to speak to the congregation. And President Biden yesterday said that he has spoken to presidents, kings and queens around the world, but indeed it was an intimidating audience. But he managed to send his message across, calling for racial and economic equality, speaking about the fact that health should not be a privilege, but a right for all Americans. He also talked about the importance of having the Voting Rights Act passed by the current Congress. You'll recall that the previous Congress, were trying, because the Democrats had majority in both houses slightly, were trying to pass the John Lewis Advancement Vote Act, which essentially was blocked by Republicans. But President Biden used that occasion to also really call on Congress to do what is right by passing that bill that will essentially ensure that all citizens have the right to decide the future of the country. So it was a significant one for him as a sitting president, and also being the first sitting president to do that, and getting the opportunity to speak really from what you will call the home of Martin Luther King Jr. He described him as one of his heroes in politics since he got into public service, and called his legacy a spiritual and a moral one, Millicent.
So what is the message across the United States today as they mark the day? I know it's supposed to be a day of service in remembrance of Mr. King.
Well, it's also a message of hope. You know, at this particular location, as you can see just a while ago, the Memorial Foundation held the annual commemoration of the death of Martin Luther King, who would have been 94 years old just yesterday. And present was the ambassador, Linda Thomas Greenfield, who is the United States ambassador to the United Nations, and of course, the son, one of the sons of Martin Luther King Jr., who talked about a peace reconciliation, love, and kindness. He emphasized the need to lead with empathy and kindness. So as scores of people continue to come to this ground to honor, the man that you can see on the symbol behind me, the message from the family to not only the United States, but the world is to lead with kindness and empathy, and for us to look out for one another, essentially.
There is so much going on, in the world and then in the United States right now, an immigration crisis, gun violence, classified documents popping up in various places. What do Americans think the late Martin Luther King Jr. would have said about it all?
Well, I've spoken to a few African Americans who have been here, and one of the things they told me is that's not something he will be happy about, because he was a man who stood for unity. He was a man who used his life work up until he was assassinated on that fateful day, who used his life work to call for unity, for other human beings to see that all humankind are the same. And so with regards to the gun violence that have dominated debates in recent history of the country, immigration, as you spoke about, as well as, the rather controversial classified documents issue that has come up quite recently, they're saying his position would be, this is not right, and this is not okay. And they know that he would have used the pulpit to, speak against these happenings in the country.
And just before we let you go, what new facts are we learning about the late Reverend King and about his life and his work?
That he was a man for the people, that he stood for people. Essentially, he cared. He cared so much so that he went to listen to people. And perhaps that's a call that folks who know him well continue to make to the human race in this country.
VOA's Ignatius Arnold, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Millicent.
Let's head over to another part of the world where security is tight. The Swiss ski resort of Davos on the first day of the World Economic Forum, which starts with an opening ceremony this evening. Davos will welcome the business, political elite for the conference, which takes place until Friday, January 20, as the annual meeting in the resort reverts back to January. The Swiss government has deployed some 5,000 military personnel to support local police. Air Force jets will again circle above to enforce a no-fly zone. 52 heads of state and government will show up next to 56 finance ministers, 19 central bank governors, 30 trade ministers, 35 foreign ministers. Heads of the United Nations, International Monetary Fund, World Trade Organization will be among 39 leaders of international agencies. Discussions are due to focus on short-term challenges such as how to avoid the risk of a global recession in 2023, how to ensure that a failing global effort to tackle climate change is not set back even further by the energy crunch exacerbated by the Ukraine war and sanctions on Russia. Well, staying with the meeting, climate activists blocked a private jet airport used by attendees arriving at the World Economic Forum this morning, calling for the wealthy to be held accountable for climate and ecological damage. As part of their Make Them Pay campaign, around 15 members of the Debts for Climate movement suspended themselves from a makeshift wooden pole structure and used barrels to block the entrance to the arrival hall of the private St. Gallen Altarian Airport in Switzerland. They also stuck posters on exterior of the terminal building which read "Davos, stop funding climate chaos," and "Davos billionaires party while the world burns." The Debts for Climate movement said they aim to hold the richest 1% represented in Davos accountable for the climate breakdown and ecological damage caused by their extreme emissions, policies and investments. In the meantime, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has cancelled plans to attend the World Economic Forum in Davos over the ongoing energy crisis in his country. The country is facing its biggest ever power crisis, with people experiencing rolling blackouts of up to 6 hours a day. Mr. Ramaphosa was due to lead a government delegation to the event, but the presidential spokesman, Vincent Magwenya, has said he will instead hold talks with leaders of political parties and the state-run power company, Eskom. An eyewitness video showed a passenger flight tilting sharply in the air moments before crashing in the Nepali city of Pokhara on Sunday, killing at least 68 people and the country's worst plane accident in 30 years. Officials say footage which showed the Yeti Airlines ATR-72 aircraft carrying 72 people flying near buildings in clear weather before turning sharply on its side. Now, audio of a loud crash was heard, followed by people screaming. Searchers on Monday found both the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder from the aircraft, which was on a scheduled flight from Kathmandu to the tourist city of Pokhara, gateway to the scenic Annapurna mountain range. Rescuers were battling cloudy weather and poor visibility as they scored a river gorge for passengers who are unaccounted for more than 24 hours after the crash. 68 bodies have been recovered.
I
live in the house just next to the crash site. The plane crashed right across my house on a cliff. One of its wings still lies on the edge of the cliff. It came to the side of my house after bouncing back and then burst into flames. On hearing the sound, we looked out and saw a huge ball of fire in the air, and then we rushed out of our house. We thought the plane was going to crash land over our house when my children and I were inside, but we are lucky that God saved us.
Now, experts believe Chinese Foreign Minister's latest trip to Africa indicates that the prospects of China-Africa ties are flourishing, adding that African nations will take more initiative to promote cooperation with China.
So they are also working in some other West African countries, including Ghana, including Cote d'Ivoire, Sierra Leone, and the rest. The Chinese companies, in fact, the Chinese government just built the largest stadium in Dakar, Senegal, sometime last year, and opened a long bridge that links Senegal with Gambia last year also. There are a lot of infrastructure coming up that are built by Chinese companies, sometimes under shared partnership.
I think what African countries want to do is also expand the nature of trade between Africa and China so that it could be a two-way flow. China has been quite supportive to African countries. China is providing a lot of infrastructure funding, including use of Chinese labor and Chinese technology to build infrastructure in Africa. So you've seen a lot of Chinese capital in Africa.
Still on the African continent, Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni over the weekend called for a ban on overseas travel by members of parliament and civil servants to save money for priority areas. He made the remarks while commissioning facilities at Uganda Petroleum Institute, Kigumba, where the country intends to train local experts in oil exploration. Uganda hopes to start pumping millions of barrels of oil in 2025 from its vast oil reserves, but the president was unimpressed that the training institute was still incomplete due to a lack of funds. The president also suggested a freeze on all allowances. A serving London police officer has admitted conducting a series of attacks on women, including 24 counts of rape, making him one of Britain's most prolific sex offenders in a campaign that ran for more than 17 years. The Metropolitan Police apologised today and said it should have spotted the pattern of abuse after David Carrick, 48, pleaded guilty to a total of 49 charges relating to 12 victims, including 24 counts of rape between 2003 and 2020. London's Metropolitan Police, which has been placed in special measures after it was hit by a series of scandals in the last year, said Carrick had abused his power as a police officer to commit degrading crimes,
including rape, false imprisonment, coercive control, and sexual assault. It means they won't have to face the ordeal of giving evidence to see justice served. The serving officer with the Metropolitan Police, David Carrick, was arrested by Hertfordshire officers in October 2021 following a report of rape. With the subsequent press interest, more victims came forward, and whilst being supported by specialist officers, reported further offences against him. The weight of their evidence was extremely powerful, and today we pay tribute to them. We commend all of the victims for their bravery in coming forward, and would like to thank them for their courage in being prepared to take the stand to see justice served. More victims came forward.
Greece's last king, Constantine II, has been buried in Athens. He had been suffering from heart and mobility problems. Constantine came to the throne in 1964 during a turbulent period in Greek history that culminated in a military coup 3 years later. He was soon forced to flee abroad following an unsuccessful counter-coup. Greeks voted to abolish the monarchy in 1974, and the former king was later stripped of his Greek citizenship.
European royalty gathered in Athens today for the funeral of former King Constantine of Greece, born a prince but spurned by his country, which abolished the monarchy in 1974. Constantine, a second cousin of Britain's King Charles and godfather to heir Prince William, lived most of his life in exile after a Greek referendum which rejected the monarchy. He died at the age of 82 last week in an Athens hospital. Former Spanish King Juan Carlos and his family attended the funeral service of former King of Greece Constantine II in Metropolitan Cathedral of Athens. As did Britain's Princess Anne, among other royal guests at the funeral of Constantine II in Athens. Known as the X, or just Glucksburg, from the German House of Glucksburg, which has connections with royalty through Europe, Constantine II was the only son of King Paul and Queen Frederica of Greece and the last king of the country. However, as Greek government officials arrived at the funeral of the former king, they were booed by a crowd which gathered outside the Athens Metropolitan Cathedral. Thousands of people queued for hours outside an adjacent chapel where Constantine's coffin draped in a Greek flag was placed to pay their last respects. Culture Minister Lina Mendoni and Deputy Prime Minister Pagagiotis Pikramenos, both representing the government at the funeral, were jeered at by people in the crowd as they arrived. Many supporters of the former king have expressed bitterness that Constantine II was not given an official state burial. Constantine, a second cousin of Britain's King Charles and godfather to heir Prince William, lived most of his life in exile after a Greek referendum which rejected the monarchy in 1974. He died at the age of 82 last week in an Athens hospital.
And flocks of white, black and brown ducks hunt for snails and bugs as they patrol the grapevines at a vineyard in South Africa's winemaking town of Stellenbosch, helping the owners steer clear of pesticides and synthetic fertilizers. Around 500 Indian runner ducks work at a natural pest control at a wine estate, but also entertain wine-quaffing tourists. According to the director, ducks are at the heart of the winery's regenerative agricultural practices, and specifically Indian runner ducks, which have long legs and upright posture, meaning they are able to reach for snails between the leaves. Nutrient-rich manure from the ducks and other animals ensure the vineyard runs as sustainably as possible.
Vista says Indian runner ducks are very... Meet the staff at one vineyard in South Africa's winemaking town, Stellenbosch. This army of around 500 Indian runner ducks has a taste for snails, and that's useful if you want to keep your vines pest-free. Ducks help the vineyard steer.
There seems to be a convoy movement there. Well, Chinese around the world are looking forward to the start of the year of the rabbit and boy. Are the preparations in full swing. Now, people are staging joyous activities in preparation, so lots of various forms of rabbit-style handicrafts and decorations up ahead. Over in Yangmin, ancient town of East China's province, Xinjiang, a lantern show kicked off Thursday with many rabbit-shaped lanterns, sets of large lighting installations illuminating the ancient town's night sky. Shopping for the Spring Festival is a key part of the celebration. In Ningbo City, markets are putting holiday decorations and seasonal food out to entice throngs of customers. Meanwhile, activities presenting intangible cultural heritage have been organized in the district of Ningbo, where visitors can experience sugar painting, paper cutting, and making kites themselves. It's Chinese Spring Festival celebrations in full swing. Well, that's our program this evening. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker.